Hey, well, listen, let's get into it. I mean, I guess a little bit of context. I mean, the thing that I find really difficult to understand here in New Zealand on housing is that we essentially have a country the same land size as, say, a Japan or the United Kingdom. We've got a lot less population, but we've actually got a lot more expensive houses. And, how have we got to this position, I guess, over the last 20 years? And why is it that our housing is fundamentally just so expensive, for what you pay, for what you get compared to other parts of the world? It's really quite outrageous. And so, what's your views on that?
Yeah, look, you're absolutely right, Chris. Relative to the rest of the world, New Zealand has some of the, if not the, most unaffordable housing in the developed world. Average prices here have hit $1 million. And when you look at it on a price to income ratio basis, that's where it gets really frightening. So if we wind back 20 years to 2002 or so, the average ratio of house prices to incomes in New Zealand was 3-1. It's now more like 9-1. And in Auckland, more like 12-1. So things have got a lot more expensive. And anyone who's travelled overseas, or I dare you, go online and have a look at house prices in Houston, Texas. You'll see that $1 million will get you a lot more in Houston than it will in New Zealand. You'll be getting a mega mansion for that money. So what's gone wrong? Look, the Productivity Commission, the Reserve Bank, the OECD, all of these agencies have looked at the New Zealand housing market. And one thing they've all said is that we have all of these artificial constraints on what land we allow to be developed for housing, really strict planning rules. And we've made it really hard for councils to rezone land for housing and to allow for intensification. And so that's one issue. We're basically tied up red tape around anyone who says, I'd like to turn that piece of land into a housing development, or I'd like to get rid of that block of houses and put up an apartment block. It's really hard to do in New Zealand and has been for some time.
Yeah, and I guess just sort of thinking it through, if we think about sort of home ownership and the actual core housing market as such, what is the real problem? It is actually supply rather than demand. I mean, you hear that language thrown around by politicians. What do they mean, and how do we think about it?
Well, ultimately, what we have in New Zealand is a housing shortage.
So I've been doing quite a bit of work in terms of immigration. Immigration, between 2013 and 2018, this country gained 260,000 new residents via net migration. That's huge. It's never been experienced. It's 3 times higher than the UK experiences per capita. It's almost 50% higher than Australia.
This is your thing.
Yeah, okay, so property, there's 3 things that drive property, I'm sure you all know this. So essentially, interest rates, jobs and migration. So they are the 3 big factors. And essentially why they're pretty much in that order is that if you go and borrow money to buy a house, just let's take residential for a moment, then pretty simply people go along and say, how much can I, they work backwards. Fundamentally, how much do I earn? How much can therefore I afford to pay? And let's say your mortgage is 2.5% at the moment, for want of an argument. Then the banks actually chuck in their models much higher numbers, over double that. So they stress test themselves that you can afford it when rates go up a bit. It doesn't mean that it doesn't have quite a big impact. So when everybody runs around, by the way, and says, it's terrible, house prices are going up, they don't really mean it. Okay, I know politicians say that all the time. They don't really mean it. I'll tell you why they don't mean it. What happens when house prices go up is you get what's called the wealth effect. And even though mum and dad, they borrow $500,000, they buy the house for the $1 million, it's worth $1 million, one day they wake up and go, whoa, 3 years later it's worth $1.5 million. They'll tell you how bad it is, but they go to Myrtle and they go, dear, we're worth $1 million, and they go out for dinner and they spend money. They really do. So the pace of increase is being too high, but they still like it. So it's all about interest rates, and if you believe they're going to track up, they'll have some impact. Jobs, can people keep paying the mortgage? Migration is quite a big factor. So it has been, saying the blindly obvious, going crazy. So just to give you an example, what we call system growth, how much do the banks lend in residential? On average, that's $15 billion a year. Just to give you an example, in the last 12 months, it's been $30 billion. So ANZ, we are 1 in 3 home loans. We're the biggest in the country. And just to give you an example, September, October, November, December, just at ANZ, we lent $1 billion a month. just ANZ.
Wow.
So we're lending 15 billion a year now at the moment.
And that's to New Zealand or
Yeah,
New
it's to
Zealand
New-
and
no,
Australia?
no, just New Zealand.
Okay.
That's just New Zealand.
Labour believe that their greatest achievement has been in housing. Why then is it so much more difficult to get a house these days? One reason is that many of those houses are so small you wouldn't want one. Indeed, some are not houses at all. Another is that in 2 years, Labour let into New Zealand 62,000 immigrants. Which is why the average deposit on a house in Auckland jumped from $5,000 to over $10,000. And why state rental housing lists are now the longest in New Zealand's history. Indeed, last year the housing situation became so bad that Labour actually fired their own Minister of Housing.
The real reason why it's so difficult to get a house these days is that there are too many people wanting them with too little money to buy them. Here's what the new national government will do about it. We will reduce immigration growth from 32,000 to around 5,000 persons a year, thus tackling the #1 cause of the housing problem. We'll introduce flexible lending that will let you pay back more when you can most easily afford it. We'll also remove the restrictions on mortgages for older homes and make loans available for their renovation. The new national government is going to do a lot more than just build houses. We're going to build decent communities and give every New Zealander the chance to live in them.
New Zealand, the way you want it.
What do you think of it, Dad? Very good indeed. A bit literal, I suppose, if one goes into it. And they're certainly going to.